Welcome back to another episode, all. Throughout this episode, we're going to watch a video and respond to it with some actual scientists involved with it and their claims to do with gene editing. And we're going to try and discuss the cons to it and the pros and see who gets to decide in the end. If you just allow me to share my screen.
The gene editing revolution has arrived, promising cures for terminal disease.
In the past 5 years, we've made more progress than in the previous 50.
And new approaches to fighting climate change.
We have the opportunity to fundamentally change our relationship with nature.
But new genetic technologies bring with them new ethical and practical risks.
Say no to GMO!
Some of it could be terrifyingly threatening, like biowarfare.
What is our responsibility as scientists and doctors?
It's really starting to bring out ideas around who belongs and who doesn't belong.
So how should the promise of genetic technologies be balanced against the potential dangers? And who decides what risks are worth taking? This is Professor James Dale, a man on a mission to save the world's most popular banana from extinction.
I reckon these Williams are the ones that were most spectacular, weren't they? God, that's incredible.
There are thousands of types of banana in the world, but all the fruit being grown and processed here, and almost every banana exported around the world, is one single variety, the Cavendish.
It yields very well. It's got quite a tough skin, so it travels well. But also, it's got a really acceptable taste and texture.
The problem is, the Cavendish is under threat. A disease typical.
Right, but this professor, as this video claims him to be, he seems to be trying to fixate bananas as what they currently are. Basically, that's trying to prevent evolution. So even though these scientists and so on claim they believe in evolution, why are they trying to prevent it? And they often make this accusation that those who protest against gene editing do so through fear of the unknown. But actually, the reason I protest against it is because of the known, because of what we've learned through history. And as we go further through this video, I'm actually very surprised with what these people have to say. And we're going to see quite a few common denominators. So if we carry on.
Typical race 4, or TR4, has spread across the world, killing Cavendish bananas.
TR4, one of the deadliest plant diseases out there.
They call it the cancer of the bananas.
You start to get that sort of motley coloration there. It gets worse there.
And now it's reached James's plantation.
And what we're looking for is the brown, which is what we call necrosis. And then you see, bingo, that was the one that had the yellow leaves. Just incredible necrosis.
Now, just allow me to point something out here. Where he's just gone saying, oh, we're doing this to save bananas, it's just chopped a tree down. And how many trees do you think is going to chop down in this process? And as evolution occurs, what are we going to need more of? Will it be all the trees that he's killing, which is reducing oxygen? Or is it going to be the bananas? Or are we going to do what natural selection claims, and we are going to evolve, and we are going to adapt? As Charles Darwin pointed out in his day, it was all about adaptation. It wasn't about it's the most intelligent species that survives, and so on. It's all about adaptation to change. So I found it pretty ironic that so-called scientists tend to be working in a very contradictory state to what they claim about evolution.
There is no cure for this disease. It's feared that in time it could wipe out the Cavendish completely. or stop it being such an economically valuable crop.
It is a really serious problem. There's no obvious replacement for Cavendish bananas for the export market.
But James...
Notice, export market. We tend to say that this is one of the common denominators. We found that all the people who really want to increase gene editing tend to get some kind of incentive from it money-wise, using it for monetary reasons, for selfish reasons, not necessarily something to help the general population.
Has a solution. He has spent 10 years engineering a genetically modified banana which can withstand TR4. There's a big problem though.
Say no to GMO! Hell no, GMO!
Because James's bananas are genetically modified, lots of consumers won't go anywhere near them.
It is unbelievably frustrating. GM still has a lot of perceived negativity in the world. Europe, for instance...
The reason it has perceived negativity is because, as I said earlier, we know what will happen, as we have already seen this done through the eugenics movement of Francis Galton, Carl Pearson and Ronald Fisher. And it is that part which mainly draws my concern, is about how is the technology going to be used, not a matter of will the technology be used. For example, I would approve of it using things like CRISPR to say cure something like sickle cell anemia, because that is actually something fatal. I claim we need to redefine what is a disability, disorder, disease, and so on. Such as, I don't agree with curing autism because it is not fatal. Down syndrome is not fatal. ADHD is not fatal. All these things that we're claiming, oh, we're going to cure the human race of them. They are not fatal. It doesn't go wrecking someone's life. You find it's the sociological things that wreck the lives of disabled people, like all the social expectations and so on. It's not actually the genes themselves.
Instance is one of those areas that they import huge amounts of bananas, but getting a GM crop through the regulatory process in Europe is virtually impossible.
He believes this public resistance could block the development of beneficial new crops.
I think it's a real problem. We're moving into a period of real flux, a real unknown period with climate change, and we're going to need to develop crops that have very high tolerance to...
We're going to need to develop crops which have very high tolerance towards the climate change. So we claim the climate change is one of the disasters going on. But how did the climate change come to pass? What exactly caused it? Was it caused by scientists trying to play God once again? Scientists trying to control nature rather than allowing nature to take its course. Was it humans trying to play God that caused so many epidemic diseases among our species today? If we treat the mutations the way they are suggesting we treat them today, like as in the eugenics movement, of how they pointed out, if you make everyone genetically identical, they'll be equally susceptible to diseases, that they'll develop diseases and possibly become extinct because of it if they get struck by a fatal disease, as everyone will be equally susceptible. So notice that up to now, we're trying to cure a problem, and they're the very ones who caused it by trying to play God, and now we're trying to solve the problem by trying to play God again. But we've seen through history, every time someone plays God, it brings disastrous results.
To drought, I'm not sure that we have all of the tools at our fingertips without the use of GM and gene editing. So I think there is a real ethical dilemma in the world now of rejecting technologies that may become incredibly important over the next decade or two.
Some believe GM technology can be used to do lots of good. So, is it...
Lots of GM technology used to do good. Yeah, the technology can be used to do good, but what is good? What is bad? These are man-made narratives. There's no such thing as good and bad according to the natural world. In the natural world, things just are what they are. It's not good, it's not bad. And where we talk about technology, it's actually hypothesized that 90% of the technological inventions we have today came from minds of people on the autism spectrum. All these people who they claim to have genetic diseases and so on, all tend to be people who have made some of the greatest cultural contributions to our population, and they now want to eliminate those genes rather than sustain them. So that's going to eliminate quite a lot of abilities for our population. If you just give me a moment, that reminds me of something a psychologist says. If you just allow me to find the right book. Here it is. The Power of Neurodiversity by PhD Thomas Armstrong. I'm sure the page is somewhere near the end. Yeah, here it is. Speaking of dyslexia, psychologist Howard Gardner warns, with the coming of age of genetics, the danger magnifies. Beyond doubt, we will discover genes that are important for reading alphabetical scripts, and there is already evidence that a small set of genes may be related to reading problems. As with the brain evidence, such information can be helpful for early intervention, but it could easily be used for stigmatizing purposes. Indeed, it might become relevant for marriage prospects, holding a job, securing insurance, or even eugenic purposes. And no doubt, especially in our interventionist society, individuals with a genetic predisposition for reading problems will look into various kinds of genetic engineering or therapy. It is possible that such interventions will work and have no negative side effects, but it is perhaps more likely that they will have unanticipated effects, and we might even want to consider which valued human abilities, example, spatial or pattern recognition skills, might be placed at risk were we to target our intervention specifically at reading disorders. End of quote. Yeah, I would say psychologist Howard Gardner's got a great point there. So just when it comes to global warming, I doubt the climate change was an anticipation. I doubt it was intended. Say World War II, I doubt that was an anticipation of the eugenicists. You know, all the results that happened from eugenics, I doubt they were intentions on the political movements around the globe. I don't think anyone appreciates World War II occurring and the loss of hundreds of millions of lives. So talk about unanticipated effects, but possibly no negative side effects. I'd say Howard Gardner's got a great point. Let's continue.
Is it right to put barriers in the way because others oppose the technology on principle? In an EU-wide poll, 70% said they felt GM foods were unnatural, but that's a very vague term.
The things that people actually grow in gardens and in fields are really not particularly natural. Many of them have genomes that have been extensively changed over the course of human history. If you look at what a modern ear of maize looks like compared to its ancestral form, you'll see something very different.
Yet there is still a fear that
Yes, and if you look at ours, you'll see the same thing. It's called evolution. I don't know why these people are being like this. You know, change is supposed to happen. You know, that is natural, which is why it's called natural selection.
that these technologies could go astray and expose people to risks they have not agreed to.
They actually already have gone astray. So not others to believe that they may go astray. They already have. We've got the evidence already that they're willing to do eugenics on those with Down syndrome. You know, oh, let's terminate and eliminate Down syndrome from the wild. But Down syndrome's not fatal. It's just seen as something sociologically wrong, socially undesirable. So they're not actually choosing which genes to eliminate according to nature. But again, what we have seen is if they keep doing this, they're just going to weaken the human gene pool. The more they weaken it, the less likely we are to survive. As again, this was something we learned in the eugenics movement. So why do they want to continue weakening it to cause devolution? So that's already evidence that we're never going to use it in the name of disability discrimination. There's clinical websites saying, oh, it's a great hope for erasing ADHD. So another confession, they're going to use it in the name of genocide on a legitimate group of people. Disallowing autistic people to donate embryos to for other people. More evidence that they've already gone astray and going to use it in the name of disability discrimination. So unless we actually come up with a valid, legitimate way to define what a disease is, what disability is, this is unacceptable. You shouldn't eliminate someone from the human population just because they do not fit a social norm, especially when social norms persistently change. Like it was socially normal historically to murder someone. It was socially normal to think that a woman is a witch and burn them at the stakes. It was socially normal to think women are intellectually and physically inferior compared to men. It was socially normal to be so racist. It was socially normal to be homophobic. That's why homosexuality was in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. All the delusional conclusions they've come to by basing things on sociological constructs altogether. So I wouldn't say things like autism are the things in need of curing. So as I mentioned, it's not about using the technology I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the motives behind using it. Why do they want to do it? Because this is more like what someone calls velvety eugenics. For people who are not educated about this stuff, it will just seem like common sense to erase disabilities from the human gene pool. That sounds like common sense. But if you're not educated about the disabilities, if you don't know the gifts that come from the genes associated with these disabilities, there is so much that you're not aware of that if you were aware of it, which is why I want to increase public awareness about this, because I think that if the public is going to be affected by this, they should require the public's consent, not just an individual's consent, and it should not be left in the hands of scientists alone. There should be more engagement with the community and our thoughts about it. Should we approve disability discrimination again? Should we do that? Should we, such as this is one thing which is inside the abortion debate, but that's still ongoing. One of the reasons why those against abortion are against it is precisely that, because the individual, if they're told that their child's going to have Down syndrome, they abort the child. The reduction rates are getting very high. In the US, it's over 90%. In Iceland and Denmark, it's nearly 100% get aborted. In Italy, it's approximately 70% get aborted. All over the globe, the percentage is getting very high. So the fact they're already practicing genocide, they've given us evidence not to trust them concerning doing this to humans.
This is Isla Morada, a tropical paradise that's on the front line of the debate about genetic engineering. Here, genetically modified mosquitoes are being released in the United States for the first time. It's part of an experiment to try to reduce the spread of Zika and dengue fever. But some of the locals have been very vocal about their opposition to this kind of intervention into the natural world.
Our economy here is tourist-based, and a lot of tourists are lay people. And if they come down here and they hear that we're turning loose some kind of weird critter, I think that there could be some impact on the economy.
As a result,
this will actually have a big impact on the entire human race. In the areas where malaria is dominant, the sickle cell mutation is more dominant there. But where does the malaria come from? So you can see the malaria and the sickle cell mutation are both dominant. But if they wipe out mosquitoes, the entire population, the malaria, with its relationship with the sickle cell mutation, it's going to be interfered with. And even once the mosquitoes are gone, the malaria will still be there. So by kicking out the sickle cell mutation, there's no defense mechanism against malaria naturally by interfering with our relationship with nature, because it destroys our harmonious relationship. As you look back further and further through history, we come to see that the further away from nature humans have moved, the more we've damaged our relationship with it, destroying the harmony. We come to see that more and more diseases have come among the human population. So it's safe to say that humans are actually the very cause of the diseases they want to cure. And how are those diseases caused? By humans playing God. So I think we should have learnt by now, this playing God stuff is only going to result in disasters.
The mosquitoes have to be released in top secret locations, away from protesters and vandals.
We just add regular tap water. The eggs hatch in about 24 hours. There's already food in there. And you can see these little holes on both sides. That's where the adult males are going to come out of.
The authorities hope this will solve the problem posed by Aedes aegypti, a mosquito which can carry Zika and dengue, and in some places has become resistant to pesticides.
Aedes aegypti
become resistant to pesticides. Precisely, so if we look at that again, as the mosquitoes have become resistant to pesticides, and then from that, it's creating a chain that we're becoming resistant to malaria. But if we go cut that circuit off, it will break us and we will not be resistant to malaria, but the malaria will still be here. So this playing God again, it's going to result in another disease. And if they choose to touch the human germline, as they've threatened to do so, that's actually going to make the following generations be born with the disease. It'll be given to every generation, and after about 4 or 5 generations later, every single human will be born with that disease. Every single human. There'll not be one human without it. But we require the variation and diversity.
control is very expensive. And what we find is that it takes up over 10% of our entire budget to control a very small population of our mosquitoes.
Up till now, mosquito control here has involved going door to door clearing standing water. British company Oxitec might put an end to that, with a genetic approach that has female mosquitoes in its sights. Only the females bite and carry disease, and Oxitec is getting to them through the males. It altered the genes of some male mosquitoes so that when they mate with females, only their male offspring would survive, meaning the number of females should crash within a few generations.
And just as I mentioned disease, that will potentially happen to humans. When we do it to the human germline, that disease will be passed on to every single offspring. So they really think we should do that, especially if the disease is fatal that it may cause.
It's essentially birth control for mosquitoes. It's a biological solution. It's targeted against one species, and it has no effect against bees, butterflies, or other pollinators.
Actually, yes, it does have an effect against other pollinators. Because as I've mentioned, where the whole Earth is one organism, as I mentioned that on a separate episode, we've got that the parasites and so on, pesticides, they've all got a relationship with what the flowers currently are, and so on. And by affecting the relationship with that, it affects the relationship that has with the other pollinators. So affect the relationship of one thing, you affect the relationship of everything else that has a relationship with that one thing. It causes a big chain of reactions. It doesn't just cause one reaction. So I see great thoughtlessness in what's going on here, in all this genetic engineering.
The project is a field trial, which has been approved by America's Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. But the way the technology is regulated has provoked concerns.
The protocols for evaluating genetically modified organisms are way short on a lot of things.
Natalie Kofler is a Harvard-based bioethicist who has attended many of the town hall debates about this program.
What I'm really concerned about is really how it's being decided upon and developed, not the technology itself.
She says the regulation of this technology isn't transparent enough and doesn't require proper...
I actually would say it is transparent enough for the case of the disabled community already, since they're actually already doing it, already using this genetic technology to go eliminating those of us disabled, preventing us from being born. So we know they're willing to do it. We already know that the motive is for want a so-called disease-free world. But from what we've said up to now, of all the relationships, that they want a disease-free world. But just genetically speaking, generally, a gene which makes someone protected from one disease also makes them susceptible to an alternative disease. Like if we take the sickle cell mutation again, those who don't have it are not so susceptible to malaria, but those who have it are protected from it, but are more susceptible to sickle cell anemia. So protected from one, but not protected from another. So if they go saying, well, we want to eliminate all mutations to do with diseases, they're basically saying, let's eliminate every single mutation in the gene pool, because this one causes that, this one that. They all cause inferior traits, all of them. So by doing so, they're literally talking about, let's prevent evolution. Let's disallow humans to adapt. Let's put a stop to evolution altogether. That is what we are suggesting here. During my lifetime, when I was a child, the way the temperature is today, I would have been getting sunburn every year when a child, but I don't seem to get sunburns. But at the temperature it is today, the temperature increase, I'd be getting sunburn. So I've adapted to a new temperature through the climate change. So by allowing nature to take its course, humans have evolved and adapted to it. So why are these lot thinking, humans are suddenly going to stop adapting, that they are now playing God, at least threatening to play God, and they want to stop us from adapting with everything else? To me, it's just plain ridiculous, thoughtless.
Proper engagement with affected communities.
It's just blowing our regulatory systems apart. One of the biggest challenges is the real need for community consent when we're talking about releasing a genetically modified organisms into people's literal backyards. We don't have space.
Now, I'd just like to ask you all, as they are releasing all these into your community, as they are going to do genetic engineering on individuals which you are interconnected to, how informed is your community about how this can affect you, or how this can affect our population, of how it can cause ecological disasters, how it can produce more diseases, ones which are even more fatal, how it could be off target? How much is your community being informed about this? Because where she mentions consent, informed consent, the term informed should give away you're required to be given all the relevant information, both the pros and the cons. As I've mentioned, I would approve of curing sickle cell anemia. So I know that there are pros to it, but yes, it can cure some genetic diseases. But as where I mentioned, it's about how is the technology used. I don't approve of using it on people without their consent. It's their consent and human rights which I am concerned about, of how they're going, as this is something else. They can go take totalitarian authority over the entire human population. Those in authority can take total authority over your life. Do you give consent to that? That all human lives should be put into the hands of some kind of king or ruler, and they do not have the right to protest? So how much have you actually been informed before such decisions like this get made, which are going to directly affect you?
Space that empowers community members in this process or gives them any real sort of agency, that to me is a really, really big concern.
Failing to engage communities properly not only risks intervening in their lives without consent, it also raises another ethical concern: the risk of turning people against the technology, meaning that they and others miss out on beneficial interventions.
By not engaging communities, we're
But again, are these actually beneficial interventions, or are the sociological constructs once again, going by Francis Galton and his biostatistics? The biostatistical method and all the delusional conclusions they have come to. Who's to say that this is not going to turn out to be another delusional conclusion, since it is based on a social narrative, since it is based on an ideology of what is good and what is bad? In the future, what they're currently saying is bad might turn out to be good. What they're currently saying is good may turn out to be bad. As they were saying, the sickle cell mutation was bad, but that's turning out to be good and a form of protection against malaria infections. So there was a mistake right there. So where's the evidence that there's no errors in the claims these lot are basing their claims on? Yeah, but they are bound to be wrong again. We should be learning from history. There's bound to be mistakes in the scientific statements, in the scientific conclusions that today's scientists are making, especially since evolution occurs. As the environment evolves, our knowledge about the environment evolves with it. So to go claiming, oh, today it's good, so it's going to be good forever, the environment's not fixated. So trying to fixate humans as what they are today by an ideology of what's the superior race, we already see a great demonstration of discrimination in the science community today.
We're setting up GMO Storm 3.0, where, we already have so much distrust in that space. This could just, create entirely new concerns.
The emergence of new types of gene editing is raising the stakes in this debate. Gene editing is getting cheaper and easier, making the technology more widely available. One of the biggest recent advances has been the development of a technique known as CRISPR, which in 2020 won a Nobel Prize for its inventors, Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna.
Human beings now have the ability to rewrite the code of life.
No, actually, humans do not have the ability to rewrite the code of life. This is another part where they're going so flawed and are forgetting about what we should have learned from the eugenics movement. Genes would not function at all without environmental signals. This is in one of the books I've got written just to my side called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gaber Mates. He points out that genes would not function at all without environmental signals, that our genes answer to the environment. So those who are claiming genes are the code of life, the language of life, seem to be forgetting about epigenetics. That just because someone's born with a particular gene, whether they have a so-called disease or not, depends on the environmental signals. Because if a disease is genetic, and if those genes are not functioning at all, wouldn't that mean the disease will not function at all? If that gene is not even switched on? So which genes get switched on and off? That's what matters, not which genes an individual is born with. Our genes as a collection as a whole just produce our existence, but our development is determined by our life experience. It's not determined by those genes a person's born with, which is why if you keep those genes in one isolated place, you are not going to see much development. It's why you can have the genes of a high IQ, but if you don't do the reading, the maths, and the work, you're not going to get a very high IQ score, because your IQ is not 100% determined by genetics. So that's another big flaw that was proven in the eugenics movement. So claiming genes are the language of life is another delusional conclusion.
CRISPR makes precise edits in DNA by using a special protein, which can be programmed with a molecule called RNA, so that when it finds a specific gene sequence, it makes a cut at that precise point in the DNA. The technique's combination of precision and ease of use opens up the prospects of tackling genetic diseases more effectively than ever before.
You cranked her up, jumped into the front seat, and off you went with a family.
I think of CRISPR as being kind of like the Model T Ford. There were cars before the Model T, but they were really expensive and they broke down all the time. Once the Model T came out, everybody could have a car. And so with CRISPR, it's just faster, cheaper, easier, better.
Mighty smooth riding now.
This ability to edit specific genes could change medicine dramatically, and soon.
There are 200 million people on our planet, our fellow human beings, who suffer from genetic diseases that are CRISPRable in principle.
One of the most recent advances is the ability to treat sickle cell disease, a blood disorder which is caused by a mutation in a single gene.
This new technology is already here and already changing lives.
Yes, it's already here and is changing lives, such as eliminating lives like those with Down syndrome, with the intentions and goals of eliminating those of us who are autistic, preventing us coming into the world. So this already illustrates that, yes, they do not want us in the world. They're claiming we do not belong here. So, and this is why I do not approve of it, because I know they are going to use it in the name of disability discrimination on so-called disabilities which are not very debilitating, but simply anything they consider to be too different. Because that's basically what this whole thing's based upon, is normality. Anything they consider to be too different, they automatically consider it a disease. Just like homosexuality. Oh, homosexuality, it's not very common. So, oh, that must mean it's a disease. That's how it's got its way in the DSM system. They automatically labeled it a disease, and that's what they are still doing. They're still calling things diseases if they don't fit social norms. So they're just casting humans out just because they are different, for general differences, that they now classify diversity as a disease, when it's clearly not. And evolution always begins from the margins. Evolution never begins from the majority. So automatically labeling the margins as a disease, and they want to terminate that disease, that just proves further they want to prevent evolution, meaning they're going to disable humans from adapting to the natural world. Then we won't be able to survive in it. We won't have the correct mutations of an organism to survive. That will become extinct. Devolution, once again, as we should have learned from the eugenics movement.
Josh Lehrer runs Graphite Bio, a company researching CRISPR-based cures for the disease. He was inspired by his time as a junior doctor when sickle cell treatment was basic.
I was in medical school taking care of my first patient with sickle cell disease, and we had really nothing to offer besides morphine and blood transfusions, which were essentially the same ways that this disease was treated in the 1950s. Nothing had really changed. What we're hoping to find here is ways to actually kind of keep improving the efficiency.
Josh's company is working on what he calls next-generation gene editing treatments.
If we had an approach that
next generation gene editing treatments. What gives him the authority over the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that? What gives him authority over every life of the next generation? Exactly. Why is it up to him? I say it should be up to the actual individual. As I did on my other response video to someone who supports eugenics, I said I would approve of cures if it required informed consent of the actual individual, as we ever bring quality of life into this case pretty often, and so on. Oh, we're trying to increase the quality of life. I often ask these eugenic supporters, well, what's quality of life? Define it. And they can never define it. I ask them, what's normal? Define it. They can never define it. So they're basing all this work on something which has no tangible existence. And that's actually against the rules of the scientific method. It's meant to be something you can observe and measure. And even Adolf Quetelet himself, who came up with the average man, confessed the average man is the impossible man. So no one's average. So to go claiming, oh, the average man is the healthy one, that's delusional to begin with.
That could go beyond cutting and essentially find and replace, correct that defect and restore the normal hemoglobin protein, that should be a definitive cure.
Restart the hemoglobin one. Yeah, if you restore the hemoglobin, they become susceptible to malaria infections. So it's just made someone more susceptible to malaria infections. Was that good of him? Or should have the individual been informed that if they accept this treatment, this genetic engineering, they'll become more susceptible to malaria infections? Shouldn't we have to be fully informed about it? Or are we just going to place our lives into the hands of people like this, who think they've got authority over the lives of future generations?
While most would be in favour of using gene editing to cure a disease like sickle cell, it gets more complicated when the technology is used to fix diseases and conditions which may be less debilitating.
I think what bothers people a lot about gene editing isn't the idea of editing away terrible diseases. It's the idea of editing traits that aren't diseases at all, like eye color or skin color. I think these are going to raise some really difficult questions.
At this lab in Moscow, scientists are engaged in one of the most controversial applications of CRISPR.
Вот здесь как раз определяют геном, ДНК человека или экзом.
They're using gene editing to try to eliminate hereditary deafness.
На сегодня мы отрабатываем методику применения CRISPR-Cas для исправления мутации, приводящей к появлению у человека наследственной тугоухости. Ее исправление могло бы существенно снизить частоту рождения глухих детей у глухих пар.
Denis Rebrikov, who leads the research, says he has 3 deaf couples lined up for treatment, and that this would be the only way they could have a child who can hear.
Если у родителей мутации совпали, они оба глухие, то, к сожалению, здесь все дети будут точно такой же патологией, с наследственной тугоухостью. И единственный, по сути, способ сделать ребенка слышащим – это починить мутацию на самый ранний.
Just allow me to point out, it always happens to be the people making judgments about disabilities don't happen to have the disability themselves, but are placing judgment upon the lives of others. They don't seem to go seeking out what do the disabled people themselves think of their lives. As we'll see a bit further ahead in this video, you find that the deaf people actually want to sustain and want to be deaf, is what we're going to see a bit later. So why shouldn't it be up to the deaf people themselves what gets done to them? Why shouldn't they be in authority of their own life? And recall me mentioning totalitarianism, We see that this guy, this doctor, he's someone up for it, who wants total control over the lives of others. Have any of you been informed about that? That's exactly what could be done to you?
На ранней стадии развития, на стадии первой клетки.
While Denise does not yet have approval from the Russian regulators to implant edited embryos into patients, he hopes it will only be a matter of time. And for many deaf people, and beyond, this is a deeply troubling prospect. Teresa Blankmeyer-Burke is a bioethicist who teaches at Gallaudet University, a college for the deaf.
So guess what? Deaf people are not the first people to get this information.
Whenever we have technology that can change the world, we need to be very thoughtful about how we use it.
She worries using CRISPR to cure deafness could damage efforts to improve understanding and integration of deaf people.
I think we're experiencing a deaf renaissance, that this kind of experience, this kind of community needs to continue, but we can't continue.
So you might be wondering, why would deaf people refuse and so on? I would say it comes back down to the informed consent. All this kind of stuff, trying to play God, often does result with side effects. How at the beginning I quoted Howard Gardner, and so on, psychologist, and he was pointing out there may not be any negative side effects and so on, which also means there maybe will be side effects. And when these side effects get discovered, if the deaf people are informed what the side effects are, that might make them decline and turn the treatment down, that they'll remain as deaf people, because they wouldn't want to take the risk of getting the side effects. Like I've had surgery, for example, and I was told about so many side effects. If you buy painkillers from a pharmacy, look on the side, you'll see side effects, risks, and so on. Medicine in general is a risk, because after all, medicine is not natural. You know, it's not part of the harmonious relationship of nature. This is still partially humans trying to play God. You know, the whole field of medicine, it's us trying to control life. But I would simply say this is taking it too far by taking it into saying certain humans do not have the right to exist. By claiming that certain species don't have the right to exist. By thinking it's up to them how the world should be.
If we have the threat of dissolving us as a people.
Some fear editing genes related to conditions like deafness could pave the way towards building so-called designer humans.
The gene editing conversation is important because it's really starting to bring out ideas around who belongs and who doesn't belong. And I think those are really important social questions that we need to reckon with.
Many rich countries already offer screening to pregnant women for disorders like Down syndrome. And some fear the elimination of conditions like this would simply be a logical next step and set a worrying precedent.
It's an evolution of, pre-implantation genomics. We have selective abortion. We're already choosing potential for genetic disorders, et cetera. It's just one next step, then just maybe being able to tailor those genomes for certain traits.
So there you go. As I said, we've just got a confession right there that they wish we did not exist, that they're not going to allow us to be born. Genetics can only speak in probability. So when they do these tests, they'll say, oh, you've got a certain percentage chance of having a baby with Down syndrome or autism, ADHD, etc. So you might terminate a baby that wouldn't have, just because you were told the would. So again, this doesn't seem to have much informed consent involved in, much information. And tailor for those genomes for certain traits. Well, what traits exactly? And we'll come down to say it's all down to social norms once again. Anything people consider too different, but consider a disorder. And I don't think it should be up to the bandwagon fallacy to determine what's a disorder and what is not. By doing this bandwagon fallacy, we should have learned from that once again. The Nazis went labelling entire races. And it wasn't just the Nazis that did this. The British, they went to an island which had a race called the Tasmanians, who were also what we now call black-skinned people. And they thought this race were not even humans, but were subhumans. And everyone saw it as moral to treat this race like animals. They saw it as moral. It wasn't a minority of people. It was global. The entire globe saw it as moral to treat this race of Tasmanians as just as animals like monkeys and so on. And then the British in the end murdered the entire race. They murdered an entire race just because it seemed to be a minority. So no, it wasn't just the Nazis in all this murderous, injurious attitudes. It was the whole globe. Not just the Nazi Holocaust. The Nazi Holocaust simply took it a step further. So they murdered an entire race just because of diversity and how they see it as a disease.
Editing embryos is especially controversial because it can cause genetic changes to be passed down through the generations via what is known as germline editing.
So germline editing affects, potentially at least, your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and potentially until the end of the species.
The doctor who sparked global outrage by claiming to produce the world's first genetically modified babies.
Germline editing has already caused an international outcry. In 2018, a Chinese scientist announced he had edited embryos using CRISPR to make them immune to the HIV virus.
Two beautiful little Chinese girls named Lulu and Nana came crying into the world as healthy as any other babies a few weeks ago.
He said that twin girls had been born as a result, who could now pass this immunity down to their children.
As a father of two girls, I can't think of a gift more beautiful and wholesome for the society than giving another couple a chance to start a loving family.
But the scientific community didn't agree. His experiment was seen as premature and dangerous.
So I think we still need to
But as you're listening, do you see anything premature and dangerous about what he did? If not, that should be a big sign towards you and red flag that you're not informed of all that can go on. So I have a problem with this, of the general public not getting to be fully informed about the consequences, both the definitive consequences and the potential consequences of what doing this to humans can result in, and why I disagree with not approving of informed consent, because I think we should actually be involved, because Jennifer Doudna claims she called for a global discussion over it, but I have never received or heard of any kind of invitation out to the general public to participate inside this discussion. So they tend to be keeping it among just the scientists themselves, and the general public don't have transparency of it, of what they are going to do, of what they are going to do to you, how they are going to affect you, but by influencing the human gene pool. Because don't forget, it's the entire human species. So,
understand the motivation for the study and what the process was for informed consent.
The risks to these babies were enormous, and the potential benefits were really quite small in a way that made it, I think, criminally reckless.
He Zhonghui was imprisoned by the Chinese authorities, and since then, there have been calls for a global moratorium on germline editing. This could put the brakes on Denise's research in Russia, and he says he's keen to see more debate about editing embryos.
На мой взгляд, должна быть внутри научного сообщества, внутри других каких-то регулирующих структур. Должно быть обсуждение этой темы с тем, чтобы выработать границы. Вот что мы должны достичь в проверках эффективности и безопасности, чтобы данная технология была разрешена к применению.
While gene editing of human embryos is tightly regulated, the same can't be said about other areas. In some countries, fruit and veg in which specific genes have been precisely edited aren't subject to the same regulation as older genetically modified produce, which typically contain genes transplanted in from some other species. And while the EU
And that's not very problematic, having genes implanted in from other species, because we actually share those species genes, such as monkeys, for example, are 95% genetically identical to humanity. So they actually share genes between species. Such if you've seen evolutionary charts and so on, you would have seen that it was just a small difference between us that made us turn into humans, and apes remain as something like apes, and we were just something like them, but not exactly the same. And it was that variation that gave us the advantage.
still bans gene-edited food, CRISPR produce can be bought in Japan and America. Some believe this comparatively permissive regulation around gene-edited plants should give pause for thought.
I don't know any country that I think has a good regulatory structure for this. It's a lot easier to do wild experiments with non-humans and with humans. Some of those will turn out to be good, useful. Some of them could turn out to be terrible. Some of them will turn out to be frivolous. But if we don't pay attention to them, we're likely to get lots of bad results. We need.
I would say that we should already know, Ben, if we're paying attention to the history of science, because the eugenics movement already teaches us a lot about this. That this playing God, in the history we've caused climate change, playing God again, the history numerous epidemic diseases which have happened through the last few decades have gone being occurring because of what humans have done to nature. Humans playing God again. I would say we should have learnt by now that all this God stuff, playing God, trying to control life, trying to control nature. From what I see, humans just tend to be control freaks and so on. And each time they've tried controlling nature, it's just produced devastating outcomes through such illogical thinking.
We need a better regulatory scheme.
But advocates of the revolution in gene-edited foods see numerous possibilities for improving production.
This is the first start of our screening process for our gene-edited bananas.
Back in Australia, James is using CRISPR to develop another disease-resistant Cavendish banana.
So we're setting up here the challenge protocol.
These gene-edited bananas will contain no foreign DNA, and so won't be subject to the same strict regulation as his GM variety. He hopes they could be the answer to the looming banana crisis.
We can take them out to field trial without getting any of those sorts of permissions, and can take them all the way through to commercialisation, which is fabulous.
So you see, once again, it literally is trying to prevent evolution. So who's to say that this time, as we interfere with nature, we're not going to cause more diseases as evolution occurs? So they don't seem to be learning from history.
From tomatoes which might lower blood pressure to mushrooms that don't go brown, gene-edited foods promise opportunities for addressing the challenges facing global agriculture.
The age of CRISPR completely changes the way we think about agriculture.
Perhaps the greatest benefit of CRISPR could be in tackling the planet's biggest challenge, climate change.
So once again, what caused this biggest challenge that the Earth's facing today? Scientists again playing God. Oh, greenhouse gases are safe, but you're not troublesome. Oh, pollution, there's nothing bad about it. Oh, you can just throw your litter down there. Oh, scientists and so on, society, they're the ones who caused it by being control freaks.
Change.
It is in making safe, nutritious, more climate change tolerant crops for the world.
Once again, making it a more safe and so on, predicting the future and then trying to control the present so that it doesn't align with the future. Well, it's not going to have a harmonious relationship with the future. But when we get to that future, because they're not allowing it to adapt, the future will kill it. It's going to die because it will not develop with the future, of what our environment's going to become, because they're not going to allow these crops and so on to adapt with us. They are going to be out and they're not going to have the required metabolic organisms in order to be able to function in the new environment. Such that was proclaimed in 1932 during the eugenics movement by a geneticist. He pointed out when the pilgrims went over to America, if they all went over genetically identically, likely all of them would have died, but some of them had the predispositions that enabled them to survive the foreign germs and the new environment, pointing out they may have not been the strongest in the environment they came from, but they were stronger in the new environment. So these may not be so strong in the environment today, but as for adapting, they'll be better in the future.
Is what we really see as the future of the biggest impact that CRISPR can make.
And it's not just crops whose genes are being edited to help curb global warming, it's animals too. This is Pleistocene Park, site of an audacious plan to bring back animals that lived here tens of thousands of years ago, and in doing so, counter climate change.
Again, this is another ridiculous claim and assumption to make. If they go restoring what was here 10,000 years ago as what it was 10,000 years ago, it did not develop in this environment. It did not have any relationship with what the world is today. No relationship whatsoever. That they are not going to get along. As they're saying, we're trying to restore the past. It's not going to suit this world. That was why it became extinct. It became extinct because it did not manage to adapt to what the world is today. So if they try to bring something from 10,000 years ago, it's not going to have adapted to today's world. So what's going to happen? It's just going to go extinct again. Ugh.
One of the more jaw-dropping is the woolly mammoth. A team of American scientists are working to recreate the prehistoric beasts by applying gene editing to elephants.
We've been trying to reduce the endangerment of the elephants by reviving some ancient DNA variation.
Now, I'd like to point out again, they're now saying the problem is endangerment, other animals coming close to extinction. Once again, who's responsible for this? Humans. And why? Trying to play God once again. Knocking down all the forest and so on, knocking down their habitats, taking their land from them. All the climate change that humans caused again. Look at how much destruction we've done to wildlife through trying to play God. So who's to say the result is going to be any different this time? We've already got people protesting against it because they know it is going to reduce the wildlife, it is going to increase human suffering. Simply, we're going to suffer in a different way. It is not going to stop suffering.
Variations found in mammoths.
Scientist George Church hopes to use mammoth DNA to create an elephant capable of surviving cold temperatures, to repopulate Siberia with these new animals.
We're not creating a new species or a hybrid species so much as rescuing the Asian elephant.
He hopes these animals could one day help control climate change by trampling the snow.
Again, no, they won't be able to help control climate change because they are all in a relation and they are interconnected, relating with each other. What happens to one affects the other, such as affect the climate change, it then affects the elephant. Do something to the elephant, it affects the climate. Yeah, I really don't understand. All of this was known all the way back in the 18th century. They already saw the nature, the whole world, as one interconnected organism. So I don't know why they are ignoring so much history and claiming, oh, we haven't learned anything about this. So again, this genetic engineering clearly is based on racism, sexism, ableism. Like as one mentioned, we already do sex selection and so on. So it's not just disability discrimination they're doing this for. They're not just doing it to cure diseases and so on. They don't even have a valid, legitimate definition of a disease. They just claim diversity is the disease, which is an illogical fallacy. A logical fallacy called the bandwagon. Ugh.
And exposing the permafrost to freezing air, which should stop it melting and releasing greenhouse gases.
If they're focused on the parts of the Arctic that are richest in carbon and most at risk, then it can have an impact comparable to a gigaton of carbon dioxide per year.
It's a
Now again, it seems to be ignoring the principles of evolution once again. The elephants and alteration in carbon dioxide and so on, that's going to affect the elephant. So the elephant is not going to be the way he is assuming it is going to be. As he's assuming it's going to be as the fixated state he restores it to, but as soon as he puts it into new environmental settings, it's not going to be the same anymore. It is going to adapt. I don't know how they're ignoring so much.
A bold claim. And even if it worked as he suggests, its effect on the overall climate would be pretty small. Many worry that the headline-grabbing nature of projects like this are diverting attention away from more pressing conservation issues.
If it starts making people think of extinction as less of a problem, then I think that there could be severe worries. That said, in some ways, de-extinction and also the associated thing of being able to, as it were, reinflate gene pools when things are close to extinct, I think that's very encouraging, the idea of being able to bring back diversity that would otherwise.
Now, again, the diversity that was lost, if by nature, it was lost naturally because it could not adapt to what the world is today. That's why it's not with us anymore. Restore it to today's world. It has not adapted to today's world. So trying to restore diversity that was not naturally selected, it's another delusional conclusion. To try and bring something into the world that cannot survive in this world. That it's very difficult to believe these lot are even scientists to come up with such claims.
Otherwise be lost.
Gene editing has the potential to transform life on Earth. And as scientists and society weigh the potential rewards against the risks, there is a need to tease out what is simply a fear of the new and what is a genuine ethical issue.
I would actually say it is not those of us protesting who are the ones in fear, such as you haven't found being in fear of diseases, in fear of disorders, in fear of disability. You found me acknowledge it is just part of nature, it is part of life. You found me saying things like, well, those of us disabled, quite a lot of us, most of us, find our lives satisfactory. You know, we are satisfied with our lives. We don't find them suffering. It often tends to be the non-disabled people judging our lives as not satisfactory. Those conclusions do not come from self-reports. But those who have listened to self-reports say They're very satisfied with their lives. They're not suffering. They're not suffering any more than us. Are you telling me or something that people who are not classified as disabled never suffer, never experience pain? Just about not just about, but everyone I encounter experiences negative experiences in life. And if it didn't have negative experience, but have no recognition of positive experience. So where people seem to talk, oh, we want to eliminate the suffering and so on, that also means eliminating joy of life, as you can't recognize one without the other. So that's saying that suffering must come before peace. That literally is true. You've got to be able to recognize what it feels like to suffer in order to value the good parts of your life, the parts of your life that you like. You wouldn't like them if you didn't dislike the opposite. So you've got to experience both sides in order to be able to recognize one, such as, say, I value today because today I have not had any epileptic seizures. So why do I value today? Because I've not had any epileptic seizures. Do you do that? The only reason I do it is because I've experienced days where I have epileptic seizures. I wouldn't know what a day without an epileptic seizure feels like if I didn't experience epilepsy. So much of my joy actually comes from the disabilities, including ones like severe epilepsy. That's what gives things value, by knowing the opposite. When you experience the opposite, it encourages you to give the other value. Like a lot of people have the tendency to take their loved ones for granted in life and don't realize how valuable they are until they actually pass away and die. So why didn't they notice how valuable the parents were, how valuable the friends were until they lost them? Because they didn't recognize life without the parents. They didn't recognize life without these other people. So they didn't recognize just how much joy those other people contributed towards their life. So suffering is actually a good thing to experience it, because that's what enables us to experience joy. Without one, you can't have the other.
Whenever you're talking about ethics and science, there is an innate tendency to see science running too fast and ethics trying to pull it back. I do think there's also a need to look at what are the ethical things you would like to see happen in the world and how might science bring those about.
Right, well, one of our ethical things that the Climber want to bring along is to create a unified, inclusive society, is what they claim. But this seems plain hypocritical according to these researchers and so on, because if they wanted a unified society, they claim it's ethical that all humans are equal in value. But how can they actually believe that when they want to eradicate us? So that's pretty hypocritical. Well, that's the end part of that video. So what I would say is these people are simply in the fear of having diseases, the fear of being disabled. So it's not actually disabled people who are frightened. We know that having a disability is not something to be frightened of. It's not something that causes more suffering in life. It's just something that causes a various form of suffering that is not so common. And when they claim, oh, we don't know what's going to happen, so no fear it. No, we do know what's going to happen. History proves it. As I've pointed out, all the things that the eugenics movement has shown us. It's shown us that every time humans play God, destructive consequences follow. The more humanity damages nature, the more sicknesses have developed. The more we've damaged nature, the less healthy humanity has become. So the more we damage nature, the less healthy it's going to become. The more we damage nature, the more diseases we are going to produce. So it's pretty obvious to those who protest of what's going to happen. And it's going to result in premature extinction and devolution. That's what we're going to say. because by eliminating that which is needed, but we simply don't know that it's needed yet. But in a way, we actually do know that it's needed, because if it wasn't needed, it wouldn't have been selected. And that's according to the scientists themselves. So why ever so contradictory, claiming we want to control evolution, but then they go contradict their own statements about evolution? How ridiculous is that? Yeah, because claiming we want to control evolution, but then eliminate humans' adaptability, eliminate our ability to evolve by destroying the margins, disallowing them to be born. That's just absolutely ridiculous. If I just look to my right, just give me a moment. Okay, here's a book by Jennifer Doudna herself. Right, and it says right here, a crack in creation, the new power to control evolution. Now, that greatly arouses me. What is Jennifer Doudna's motives? Her, the author of this book, wanting to control evolution, wanting to play God, once again, want to be just like Francis Galton, Carl Pearson, Ronald Fisher. That really makes me challenge who she is. For her to think it is her place to control nature. So all the big talk she's put up on stage, which I've listened to her, and so on, I really don't think she is as concerned or has been as engaged with the disabled community about what do we consent to people doing to us, about what do we want for our lives. So since she wants to control evolution, it sounds like to me that those who support CRISPR on controlling evolution, you want to control it because you fear what it's going to bring. You fear the future. The future is unknown. As I said, what's good today might turn out to be bad in the future. What's bad today might turn out to be good in the future. So, as I've confessed, I don't know, but I don't seem to fear the future, do I? Of what's coming. But all these people who are trying to control evolution, they tend to be in fear of diseases, fear of disorders, fear of giving birth to so many people of our population, which is plain discriminatory altogether. So it's not us trying to pull science back. It's us fighting for our right to exist. It's pretty disgraceful that in the 21st century, disabled people are still having to verify our right to existence, especially when most of what is called deficits are just social narratives. As when you look through the DSM, it's just a list of social biases. The concept of normal wasn't invented until 1840. Look up the term normal. You'll find it wasn't in common use until 1840. It was made by Francis Galton, based on Adolf Quetelet's idea. Francis Galton was the first one to apply statistics to humans. So how were scientists understanding humans before Francis Galton applied statistics to humans? Before that, our human species seemed to have been very healthy. We were a very healthy species before that. Before they created this average man and tried to manipulate everyone to be just like it. So that's actually an artificial human. And as the medical model has tried to make everyone this artificial human, sickness, disorder, etc., has only increased. 1852, just 60 disorders. 2013, over 300. Where did all these disorders come from? I'm afraid evolution does not occur that quickly. These disorders are clearly sociological constructs, just like the biological racism in science. It's just a continuation of the eugenics movement. The forced sterilizations didn't stop until the 80s. Electroconvulsive therapy is still ongoing this day. Gay conversion therapy was still ongoing in the 1980s. Black people are educationally subhuman, still believed in the 1990s. So this is not historical stuff. It's all still very recent. So for them to choose to ignore all of this and not take this on board, to neglect their own discoveries, their own knowledge, shows that they're based on an ideology. But as scientists, they should know that science is not to be based on ideology. So it shows they do not have good motives. Those who want to do this genetic engineering, if it was for the benefit of humanity, they would actually make society evolve around humans, not modify humans to evolve around the society. They wouldn't disregard human needs. They would actually regard human needs and design the society in a way that suits humans. So why aren't they? Since we know that we are healthier when in a harmonious relationship with nature, they wouldn't choose to destroy nature. They choose to try and take us back to nature, to go back to the ways we naturally were before they created this artificial average man. They wouldn't continue going down Francis Galton's ideology as they are doing so. They wouldn't go being making such oversimplifications on genetics, such as they wouldn't go saying that the earth is not all interconnected, that everything around us is relating to us, that we've got a relationship with it. They wouldn't go casting all of this out of the picture if they did not have some selfish motive. So, I hope that this has brought you to more awareness of what kind of things this can result in. That is going to result in totalitarianism over your lives, which these documentaries don't seem to share very much. It can result in more ecological disasters, result in more diseases being produced, making the human species unable to evolve and adapt. That we will be extinct because as the environment continues to evolve, we will not be able to evolve with it, then we will not suit the settings anymore. And by not aligning with it, not having that harmonious relationship with nature, oh, sorry, we're gone. That's it, humanity's gone again, which should have been learned through the eugenics movement. So it's just so depressing that, well, I find it so depressing that I live in a culture, I live in a world that wishes that specific people did not exist, while at the same time claiming all humans are equal in value. So to me, it sounds like that we're being classified as not human, that we are still being dehumanized by the science community. Either that, or they're just plain hypocrites, one or the other. I have heard a scientist on a particular webinar who has worked with Jennifer Doudna, he claims, and apparently I like his attitude. He's got a good one. He says, regardless of any children he gives birth to, well, not him, but he and his wife, any children they give birth to, they will accept regardless of any genetic, biological differences. And I like how he points out at the end on his final sayings, we should solve problems by using more love, not less. And there was another gentleman on the webinar who works for companies and organizations that support those with Down syndrome, for example, and he claims that his daughter with Down syndrome, that she's endowed with Down syndrome. I love that attitude coming from that father. And that's a great father, someone who actually accepts their children for who they are. For as they are, as they were born. That's what good parenting is, what being a good parent involves. If you choose to have children, that means you've made your bed, now it's time to lay in it. It's not time to go destroying someone else's life. So please, spread the awareness among the public of what ecological disasters can result, and all the cons that all these documentaries so optimistic seem to be failing to inform you about, such as it could affect every generation, cause extinction, and so on, be abused in warfare. Yeah, because the public doesn't seem to be getting informed about these things. So please spread this message and inform more about the ongoing discrimination in the science community, the ongoing dehumanization, and their threat towards you of taking totalitarian authorization over your lives, that you do not have the right to agency. Inform members of your community that these scientists are doing things that can have very negative effects on you, and you're not getting to have a say. Inform them of the lack of transparency over your community, that there's people doing things that can affect their life, but they're not even being informed about it. So please help spread the message of both the pros and the cons. So inform your friends that yes, genetic engineering can help cure genetic diseases, but it is most likely, considering the attitudes of these scientists, considering their attitudes, it is going to be abused. They're going to use it to abuse people, as they are already doing so, confessed by a bioethicist. So please spread the message if you wish to support the disabled community. If you made it this far, thank you for listening.